Today, I'm excited to welcome Kris Carr on the show. Kris Carr is a multiple New York Times bestselling author, wellness activist, and cancer thriver. She's been living and thriving with stage 4 cancer for almost 20 years now. She's been called a force of nature by O Magazine and is a member of Oprah's Super Soul 100, recognizing the most influential thought leaders today. Kris is the subject and director of the documentary Crazy Sexy Cancer, which premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival and aired on TLC and the Oprah Winfrey Network. You may have seen or read about her in Scientific American, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, or on Good Morning America, The Today Show, the CBS Evening News, or on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Kris teaches people how to take back their health and their power. Her work will change the way you live, love, eat, and treat yourself. Find her at kriscarr.com, where she publishes an award-winning blog, and you can download her free wellness tracker. Kris is also a magical unicorn. She's a mentor and an inspiration to me, and I just have so much respect for her and how she lives her life. I'm thrilled to be sharing her with you today, so let's get going. Hello, and welcome to the How We Can Heal podcast. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I created this podcast to share deep conversations that encourage us to move through life's toughest circumstances. Let's get talking about how we can heal. Hello, Kris Carr. Welcome.
Hello, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. I love you so much, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm so happy to have you here. You have no idea. I've been just excited all day about it.
Me too, honey.
So I'd love to start off. I've been talking about, hey, I'm starting a podcast, and I've told a few of my friends secretly, oh, Kris Carr's coming on. And they said, like, what's her story? Tell me about her. And I was like, oh, she's going to tell you. So I always start with, I've heard you tell your story in different places in different ways. And I always feel like Valentine's Day is that start of a major journey for you. So wondering if you can kind of take us back, and for people who haven't heard before, just let us know what happened to you on Valentine's Day. How many years ago now?
19 years ago.
19 years ago.
Yeah.
You had just the sweetest? No, I don't know what word you would use to describe it. You had an interesting Valentine's Day.
Life-changing Valentine's, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed on February 14th, 2003 with a very rare stage 4 sarcoma that is incurable, that I've been living with for the last 19 years. And when I was first diagnosed, we didn't know much about it. And it's because it's rare, like with many rare cancers or rare diseases, oftentimes there isn't a lot that we know about it because there isn't a big enough patient pool for us to start to do studies and research and get funding and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So back then it was even less known. And so the first doctor that I spoke to suggested a triple organ transplant. So I have tumors in my liver and both of my lungs. And I was in a very different profession. Wellness was not my passion. I knew nothing about the body other than I had one.
I think I got one. Yeah, it's there. Yeah,
I had one, you know what I mean? And so here I was just thrust into this world that was so foreign to me. And with this very scary diagnosis, I knew enough to say that that wasn't the path that I wanted to take. And so I started to research and have second and third opinions. And I recommend that to anybody, no matter what happens in your life. If you have one of those big wake-up calls, don't go with the first doctor that you speak to. Make sure you meet with a bunch of people, because then you'll start to see a consensus or, bedside manner, all of the things that are so important when you choose your health path forward. And so I finally, after, being given an expiration date and all the different things from all the different oncologists, found an incredible person who is basically he's my co-partner, right? He's my oncologist. He's been caring for me for the last 19 years now, and I haven't done any treatment. So what we do is we watch. And while I'm watching, and I have a slow growing disease, so that's part of the reason why we can do that. But my disease can become aggressive. So it can start out aggressive, it can start out slow, it can change at any point. And so this watching practice has become my watch and live practice. And really, it was an opportunity for me to say, if you only have a certain amount of time, how do you want to spend it?
Yeah.
Regardless if you're, at the time I was in my early 30s, now I'm in my early 50s, how do you want to spend it? Regardless when you get that news, right? Your mortality basically gives you that wake up call, whether you want that call or not.
Yeah.
And I answered the call and I said, I got to get busy living. And a lot of the things that I was doing at the time, I decided that's not how I want to spend my days. Right. And
Yeah.
so I changed where I lived, I changed my career, I went on a very big and deep healing journey. And I'd say that my life is richer for it. It's not a gift. It's not something I'd want to give to you.
Right. Thanks.
But there has been a lot of richness that has come as a result of my journey.
Yeah, a lot of people will describe that, I mean, in, like, super technical terms as post-traumatic growth, like something
Yeah,
awful happens that you would never wish on anyone ever, and yet, somehow it's this catalyst, it's a wake-up call or, you use the words expiration date, like somebody gives you an expiration date and you go, "Whoa, wait, what?" And that reorients everything, right? Like, where am I living? Who am I spending my time with? What am I doing? And what do I actually wanna do? So it can kind of allow maybe a deeper part of yourself to come to the surface.
absolutely. But it's interesting about post traumatic growth as I'm learning more about it through the course of the work that I'm doing right now. Is it's post trauma. So you have to go into the places that scare you and go into the difficult nooks and crannies of how you've constructed your life, or what has happened to you in order to get to that growth. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road, and it certainly has been on my wellness journey, and also with all the people that I support and my students and people in my community and so forth.
It's such a theme, I think, here so far is to like, there's work there. It's not like, oh, this awful thing happened, but I also feel great. And now everything's wonderful. It's like this awful thing happened and I stopped and I took inventory and I changed, I made different decisions. And whether it was like those decisions became really clear all of a sudden, or there was like a fogginess first, it's not, even though the result seems so inspiring or so beautiful in ways, at the same time, like there's really going into it there, right? Like facing what has happened and what it means to you, which I think takes a certain amount of, people might call it strength or resilience or grit, but it takes something to really courage, I would just say, to look at how is this impacting me and who do I want to be now? And it's almost easier to just like drink or overwork or over whatever to not feel and not ask those bigger questions, but there's a huge cost to that, obviously.
I love the way you describe that. It's interesting. You were reminding me of this. I think it's an Under Armour commercial, and I think it's Michael Phelps. And it's so easy to look at these great athletes or whoever we look up to and say, "Wow!" You look at the end result and you say, "I want that. That must be the coolest thing." But the commercial is really focuses on those early mornings and his practice and his exhaustion and all of the work that goes on behind the scenes that none of us see, that helps us get to our greatness, our healing, and so forth. And so it's a beautiful path if you're willing to walk it. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I imagine for someone like that, it's like the blood test and the optimal vitamin levels and the changing of your diet. And yeah, the like not pressing snooze at whatever AM. And there's a lot of daily things that go into that. The other thing that stood out in what you said is, just living with this diagnosis. I mean, you've been living with it for 19 years now. You're such a like inspiration for thriving to so many people. And the last couple of years, there's been a lot of keywords thrown around. One of them being living with uncertainty, right? Like,
Mm.
how do we live with this uncertainty? We're living in these unprecedented times. We're living with uncertainty. And I'm like, okay, Kris Carr has been living in unprecedented times for 19 years since Valentine's Day in 2003. And, she's been living with uncertainty every freaking day, every moment, I'd imagine. And so what has helped you in living that way? Like what can we learn from you? And all of these days, I'd love to do the math quickly, but it's not going to happen. But like all of those days that have happened since you got diagnosed.
Yeah, that's a great question. I take it one day at a time. and I try not to get too far ahead of myself.
Yeah.
I am very mindful about not catastrophizing.
Yes.
So I would say that my disease has been a mindset growth more than anything else. Living with stage 4 cancer has really um, ex- given me a mindset workout, let's just say.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. A
Because
real tough one.
yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to go to fear. It's easy to have strange, like I remember a few years ago, I had this new lump, and I have about 24 plus tumors in my body. And I had this new lump, and I've been doing these practices. So, mindfulness, I'm huge on meditation and stress reduction and movement and, all of the things that can get us back into our body, back into the present.
Yeah.
Grounding myself throughout the day. But sometimes, even somebody who's been practicing as long as I've been practicing, you get tripped up. And so you can go to those places, those scary places where your
Yeah.
mind gets taken over by all of your thoughts that are fear based, and you go down these negative spirals. And I had this little lump on my arm, and I thought, this is it.
Oh,
I went to
yeah.
the place that I used to go to in my early days, when it's like a cough or an ache or a new thing would make me think my disease has now become aggressive. So with, I'd say, the classic cancer story, we imagine that the patient gets diagnosed, and then the point is to go through some sort of treatment, and then the hope is to have remission.
Yeah.
And when you're through, you're called a survivor.
Right.
Right. So that's why I call myself a thriver, because I'm not through.
Yes.
Remission is not something that I actually focus on anymore. It's not something I try to attain.
Yeah.
It's not something I'm striving for. It's really like, how do I feel today?
Yeah.
And so coming back to, not letting your fears take you down, and just noticing when, okay, what if I just look at the facts here? How
Yeah.
many years have I been living with stage 4 cancer, and I haven't popped a new tumor out of in a strange place? Like, what if I were to do a little detective work here? What is the chance that this has happened? It's very slim. So really, it's about self-coaching and self-soothing and bringing yourself out of that place of, I'm in fight or flight, and I can go back into rest and digest. I
Yeah.
can call my oncologist and say what's going on, and then he was like, it's a fatty deposit.
You're like, that's so glamorous. Can I call it something else?
I'll take it though. It's better than more sarcoma. But it's just a reminder of where our fear-based thoughts can go, especially based on our own history, our own trauma, our own grief, our own the places in our body where we're holding all this stuck emotion.
Yeah.
And I have the opportunity to play with that on a regular basis.
Yeah. I just had this thought. It's your unicorn horn. It's like trying to come out of the arm. It's all, is this where I go? Is this where I go?
Wrong way. Yes.
You're like, what are you doing over there? Come over here. You go up here.
I like that.
I just feel like people can relate so much to what you're talking about in terms of COVID, of like cough. Oh my God, I am going to die. Right. And I can't think of anyone who hasn't had that thought, whether someone coughs across the room and they like run, or, and we've been going through this of just being so attuned to every little shift.
Mm-hmm.
And, you mentioned two things, and I'm a therapist, so I think in these ways of like cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a list of cognitive distortions, right? That, if you go through that, that's like a great form of just self-reflection and growth. Because you mentioned, it made me think of, you mentioned catastrophizing, but also makes me think of, sometimes we'll call snowballing. They're like very closely related. Where one thing, it's like sneeze, I'm dead, right? Like how did it go from sneeze to I'm dead, and how did it go from something in my arm to this is cancer, or this is related? And it's obvious, like of course we're going to go there, and think that. But the important part again is like that little effort, that mental work to go, all right, take a breath, back up. What do we know? Who do we want to talk to for support about this? It's not that you dismiss it or ignore it. It's just that you back up that 0 to 100 fear response and come back with some wisdom, right? You get regrounded and you go, okay, this is how we can address that.
Absolutely. So perfectly said.
And so you now have helped, I mean, thousands, I don't know, millions, so many people on their health journey, right? Whether they're living with cancer or wanting to just feel better. What kind of healing do you feel like people are looking for when they come to you?
Mm, depends. So my audience straddles two different groups of people.
Yeah.
I have a large audience of patients, specifically cancer patients, but also
Hmm.
patients of all sorts, autoimmune, you name it. And then I also have a lot of people who are just really interested in wellness and prevention and taking care of themselves, who
Yeah.
don't want to be patients.
Yeah.
I have people who are experiencing warning signs and they're like, oh, I better get my shizzle together. And I've got people who are in full blown wake up calls, right? So
Yeah.
I would say that in the beginning, people come often because they've had some sort of diagnosis or they come because they want to change their diet. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting with what you're eating, and I teach an anti inflammatory diet. But really, I teach an anti inflammatory lifestyle. And so a lot of times people come in with the food or for the food, but what we quickly move to what's eating you, right?
Yes.
Because
Yep.
food, believe it or not, is easier, even if we come from a background or a lifelong experience of having a distorted relationship or an unhealthy relationship to food. I think food is a vehicle, but really it's what's going on behind it.
Yeah.
And so we quickly moved to that place, and that's I think that's where the real transformation starts to happen.
Absolutely. So you're doing your own, it's like, I mean, it's therapeutic work, right? It's like, okay, what are you eating? What's eating you?
Yeah,
And then you provide this guidance that is really multifaceted, right? And I know you have a membership community where you support people. And so you're not just talking about food and, what's eating you. There's all these different
yeah,
ways that you
yeah.
support people.
So I practice what I call the 5 pillars of wellness, and so what we do in my wellness community is we focus on optimizing what we're eating, what we're drinking, what we're thinking. That's the big one. That's the hardest one. And how
Hmm.
we're resting and how we're renewing. And renewing for us is through movement and it's also through play.
Yeah. Can you paint a picture of like so this podcast is called How We Can Heal. I feel like healing is a loaded word. What does that mean? How do we know we're healed? Like you're saying you're thriving and you're living with stage 4 cancer. So for you personally or in your community, what do you resonate with that word? What does that look like if
Oh, yeah.
someone's healed?
That's a beautiful word. First of all, I don't think there's an endpoint to our
Yeah.
healing. Right? I would say for me that healing isn't the absence of something. So for one thing, for in my community or with me, healing isn't the absence of disease, but
Yeah.
healing is the presence of vitality.
Yes.
Right? And so when we're on our healing path, we're what we're trying to experience more of is vitality, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily like we crossed the finish line, we got the gold stamp, we're out of the woods, we're in remission, whatever it is. It's like, am I feeling better every day? Do I feel that vitality, that life force? Am I happy? Am I joyful? Like more often than not, because life is complicated, it's messy, and to expect it to be perfect is to be very disappointed because that's not how it works. Right?
It's not. And it's never going to be like that's another cognitive distortion, all or nothing thinking. Oh, it's perfect and it's awful. Oh, it's this and it's that. And one of the things I so appreciate about you is like I'm elated and excited and I love my new house and I'm grieving and it's complicated and I feel this today and I feel that today and it that's life, but somehow we have been acculturated or conditioned to think it's
Yeah.
like this on or off switch or emotions are like pick one. They have those little refrigerator magnets where you put on the thing that you feel today. And I'm like, can we just broaden that window so I feel all of these?
I love that. I'm so glad you said that because I think also that mentality keeps us moving on this treadmill of like self care to dos, right? Because you're always
Yes.
trying to get better and better and better, as opposed to being like you're already good and awesome.
Yeah. And get it done. Like we're trying to get it done.
Yeah.
So then we can rest after or something. Like,
Yeah, that's a big one. I will say just from my own personal experience, I think a lot of us put our lives off for that day when we can check that box.
Yeah.
And that day might not, like your longevity might not make it that far. So you're waiting for this day where you can check off all your to-dos and say, now I can live.
Yeah.
And that might be the day that you're diagnosed with cancer.
Yep.
Right? That might be the day that you drop dead of a heart attack.
Yeah.
Right? So how can we live along the way every day? Not just, when in these milestone moments, or when we've accomplished this or that.
Yeah. You're making me think of my best friend's father, who retired. He was a teacher and retired, and had all these plans to travel, and died of a heart attack. And that was a huge lesson for her, and I think that's a huge lesson for all of us. And I know you're going through that and went through some of this with your own dad, who passed recently, and that I think I remember you sharing him passing on some wisdom around that, like some words he shared with you, or I don't know, is that something he connected with you about towards the end?
He did. He said, love, the golden years are for shit. I was like, tell me more.
That's some wisdom right there.
Tell me more about what I can look forward to. Why don't you? He said the golden years are for shit. You got to make your golden years now.
Yeah.
Right. And so, do I believe the golden years are for shit? Absolutely not. But do I believe that you have to make your golden years now? Absolutely. I think that is just such profound wisdom. It's about not putting off your life. Life is a luxury.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a gift. And I think we forget that, and we get, mired in our own whatever thoughts or doubts or questions. And then sometimes it takes these wake up calls like this. And I'm curious for you, you've had this long career as a wellness advocate. And I know from other conversations we've had, losing your dad was huge, right? And I think, everyone has their own relationship with parents and complications and all these things, but and everyone has their own unique experience with grief, but people are dealing with that on a much larger scale right now. And so I'm wondering, what from all of your experience, having been diagnosed with cancer and learning all these things about yourself, and revamping your whole life to focus on thriving now, helping all these other people, what from that has helped you as you've moved into, I think, is kind of new territory, right? And facing that close of a loss.
Yeah, so I would say compassion. A whole lot of self-compassion has been the thing that I keep coming back to when I go to new levels of grief and understanding grief. And also, I would say that the experience that I've had of living with stage 4 cancer is saying to myself, you need to care for your disease.
Yeah.
Not try to get rid of it or get angry. I've gone through all of the things, and I can get angry from time to time, like, you know what I mean? But like, what does it look like to actually care for your body, care for cancer? Like, what does that look like? And accept it, and care for it. And that's the same thing with grief. So I've kind of applied that same thinking of like, accepting that I'm experiencing it and learning what caring for my grief actually entails and looks like. And realizing that even though I've been through loss in my life, including the loss of my former identity, and the loss of our so-called safety, when it's like when you don't know you're sick and you think you're well, and you have this sort of Teflon invincibility, or you have all of these notions about what life looks like, right? And then all that changes when you get diagnosed. And so I have realized how much I haven't grieved certain parts of, like, I didn't really grieve the diagnosis because I got busy.
Yep.
And I got busy taking care of myself and then others, and like building a beautiful community and all that. But my therapist told me something so wise. It's just like, when the grief train pulls in the station, it brings all the cars.
Yep.
Right?
It sure does.
And you get this opportunity to go back and grieve things that you didn't know how to grieve, or you just couldn't access at the time, or you're too scared to, or,
all the things.
All the things. And so I'm understanding now how I misunderstood grief along the way, and how it was very foreign to me. And I continue to learn a lot about myself in the process. Like most recently, I'm really tapping into my judgment,
Mm.
judging others for not asking me how I am. It's been a year. It's like life moves on and their lives move on. Of course, right? I'm like, yeah, ask me how I am. Or judging myself.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you be over this by now? What are you? You're acting like a child. Maybe if you were 5, but you're 50, and so I do not believe these things. But this is like where we can go,
Yes.
right? So just seeing all of those parts of myself and going, oh, where's this coming from, and how can I put some care in that direction?
Yes.
So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'd say like the through line is how can I care for my grief? Yeah.
100%. It all makes so much sense to me. And I feel like how can I care for this is it's not even directly responding to that judgmental chatter, but it sort of shushes it.
Mm.
Like you're like, okay, yeah, oh, what if you were 5 or you're 50? All these like judgments and things coming at you. And it's just like, well, how can I care for this right now? And the other thing that stands out to me, Kris, and Gabby mentioned this in a different way too, is how hard it is to go there, to really just
Mm.
see whatever the train is that just pulled up to the station when it has something like grief. And again, like I think people are experiencing this all over the world. It's something I've experienced personally, that you think about, oh, if I lose this person, I'll be so sad. And then the grief is actually so much more than just that sadness. I mean, my experience at least was like a truckload of, just getting hit by truckloads of emotions.
Yeah.
And things that I wouldn't have expected. And so I think I don't know how, everyone's process is going to be unique, but it's like, how and when do we look at those truckloads? And
Mm.
like what I'm gathering from you is like, well, when they show up and when you're aware that they're there, because sometimes it's not like you were saying to yourself, okay, Kris, let's go on this advocacy journey and not feel these feelings. You're just doing what you're just responding, right? And responding in a really inspired and intelligent way. And then later on, this comes back around. And I think what's really important, I feel like for all of us to learn, and this is from my experience as a therapist, is like those things don't go away. They hang out. They just lurk. They hang out and they wait for an opportunity. And one of the things that I found in yoga was, movement and rest and then space, that the lurkers would come out in that space at the end. Seriously, right? Like they're like, oh, what am I crying about? What's this? Oh, I guess I am sad about something. And I remember this like vividly, going back to a friend, and I had gone through a breakup my first year of college, and went back to my roommate, and I was like, I just got super sad in Shavasana. I think maybe I'm like not feeling all of the grief of this breakup. And she's like, yeah, you haven't really been talking about it much. And I was like, interesting. Like, I get this stuff on a cognitive level, but I wasn't expecting that. Right. So I feel like that's such an important message for all of us to know, that like this stuff is there and we can pay attention to it, or we can put it off. And sometimes we don't have control over that timing, but we
Yeah.
can at least be curious, and we can at least have that attempt to care.
I love you. As you were speaking, that was the word that was coming to me, which was curiosity.
Yes.
If we approach our healing through the lens of curiosity, as opposed to judgment or fear or frustration, and just go, that's interesting. Tell me more
Yeah.
about that.
Yes.
Oh,
You're such a therapist. That's perfect. Say more about that.
well, I've been in therapy for a whole lot of years, and have learned how to self therapize. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think when I'm struggling with my emotions, when I'm struggling with whatever is coming up, that is usually the place that I go to, curiosity, because I know that there's some riches in there if I'm willing to go. And I think you said it so beautifully, Lisa, is like there is no finish line. We're not looking, there's no there, right? This is a
Yeah.
circular experience. So we keep orbiting around the same things throughout our lifetime. And each time we come back, we understand a little bit more about ourselves. We have a little bit more wisdom. We maybe also be able to create more meaning in our life as a result of it.
Yes.
So it's this beautiful circular process. I find that, how I would define healing. Um,
Yeah.
and each time we come back, we have this opportunity to feel more alive and to experience more of that vitality because we're releasing some of the things that are blocking us. Um,
Yeah. And I love the curiosity too, because I've definitely seen people, probably myself at times too, where you just want to go in there and get it all done. Like you're like, let me uncover all, like sometimes people use the term shadow work or things like that, where it's like, let me get in there, uncover every rock,
yeah.
sweep out from under it, and then I can go live after that. And so I really appreciate that circular dynamic you're describing of like
Mhm.
every time it's an iteration and you slough off a little and you move through something. And sometimes your whole system is ready for a big chunk to move through and sometimes it's not, and we can't always control that, but we can be curious and we can ask, how can I care for myself, and how can I care for this experience, right? And that stands out, whether it's cancer, whether it's trauma, whether it's loss. It's like, well,
Mhm.
how can I respond to this? And then there's this beautiful relationship happening rather than like a tug of war or a bludgeoning or whatever it is that we try to do sometimes. We're like, let me just take this thing out, right? It's like, doesn't
Yeah.
always work
We
that
don't need
way.
an emotional colonic. You know what I mean?
No.
That's pretty messy.
Yeah, pretty messy, but, I know plenty of people that would sign up for that, be like, "Yes, please, get it all out." So, I'm curious too, in your experience of grief, is there anything that's surprised you about it? Like I shared, my experience of grief was different than I would have expected it to be. Is there anything that stands out to you that's just different or surprising?
Well, I think it comes back to the grace that we're talking about. And yeah, even though I may not seem like a type A person, I very much am a type A, hyper vigilant, get it done, number one person. And
Yes.
so the person who was diagnosed, almost 20 years ago, I definitely approached healing that way, like get it all out and let's
Yeah.
move forward, and th- I made a lot of monumental changes that are so important and spectacular in my life, but I think most people can't approach it that way with success. We need to go slow and steady. And even the stuff that I thought I had really tackled when I was 30, it's like I'm really starting to get it now at 50, so I would say that give yourself permission and know that it's going to take longer than you think it's going to take. And that's okay. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I think, such a consistent learning is this isn't something I necessarily have control over. I have to, there's the acceptance of, in the case of there's the acceptance of a loss, but there's also the acceptance of the process after the fact. And I think that one can almost be equally or almost as hard to like, oh, I've been impacted in this way, or my life has been impacted in this way. And this is how it is for now, for today at least, and accepting that can be really hard. And I am with you on the, type A. I would go to all the like sweatiest yoga classes for the longest time and every chaturanga, and it's like I gotta do it all, check, check, check. And sometimes it's a beautiful superpower, and other times we're chasing our own tail.
Yeah.
um, so I'm curious too, with your dad, if there's been like a spiritual connection or anything that you feel in the wake of that loss that's shifted for you or shown up for you.
Definitely. There's a lot to say there, but I will say that I have one of the things that I've experienced is a return to faith. Um, and that is not something that comes easily for me, or it hasn't in the last, I'd say, decade of my life.
Mhm.
And so, and when I say faith, I'm talking about faith in something bigger than me. Um,
Yeah.
and so I have definitely experienced what I choose to believe are signs,
Yeah.
and those are so meaningful to me. And it makes me realize how important it is for us to actually take in our environments, because we're getting information, messages, love taps, support all the time, but we're so
Mhm.
often, well, I'll speak for myself, I'm usually, like caught in my own mishigash, my own stuff. They don't necessarily see it.
Yeah.
And so whether, a couple days after my dad died was Valentine's Day, and he was always the first person to call me, how's my Valentine? And, we would talk about how I'm doing on that day, and you're always going to be my Valentine. And we just talk about where I was, because it's obviously like a very monumental day for me. And so this was the first year that didn't happen. And so after he passed on February 11th, and obviously Valentine's Day is the 14th. And so I was in Florida at the time, and I asked my mom if she wanted to go for a walk with me on the beach. And as we were walking, and we go far beyond where people are, and so it's pretty isolated, and we see these 3 roses in the sand, and we just both stood there, like, because he always gave us flowers, so it was like, we have these 3 roses, and I thought, I'm going to choose to believe that that's love from my dad.
Yes.
Or in that moment, I'm going to choose to feel the love that I still have from my dad. That love doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
I think so much of grief is like, you have all this love and now you don't know where to put it.
Yeah.
It doesn't die. You still have the opportunity to share it, and even share it in your loved one's memory, or share it by connecting to the wonderful experiences that you had with your loved one. But I think as humans, it's so easy for us to go to the negative. And we're biologically wired to do so. It's how we evolved and stayed safe and got to where we are today. We have to actively go to the positive and go to the love. And so, cut to 1 year later, I was just down in Florida with my mom, because I didn't want her to be alone on the 1 year anniversary of his passing. I said, let's go for a walk again. Wouldn't you know, Lisa?
Stop it. Yes.
Yeah. Another, like this one, it was just 1 red rose standing up in the sand.
That's incredible.
And I said,
well, I can't think of a time I've ever seen a red rose on a beach stuck in the sand. Like, I mean, sometimes I think our logical minds go, okay, well, let me explain, or I'm choosing this, but there's an element of wow here, right? There's an element.
I did. And again, it's just like, I chose to just be in that space of everything's possible. And he's still with me in my heart, in my love for him, in the way I see the world. And it was just like a wink.
Yeah. It's a moment of, it feels like, or is a moment of connection, right? When we feel like we don't have that connection anymore, because that person, we don't have that, person cruising around in their body where we can go put our arm around them. But I mean, I've experienced this too, where it's a moment of connection with that person. And yeah, we're talking about things where, I don't know, I can't explain, I can't map it, but it does feel, and I have spoken with people close to me who've lost people, who feel like that choice to just lean into it and allow the love, that's so powerful, to not have to know the end all be all. This is how it is, or this is what this means. Like, this is how it feels for me in this moment, and I'm going to feel it. And I'm going to feel that connection to my dad. Or for me, it was birds would fly over my head all the time after my brother passed, like to the point where when I was out with a friend at brunch or lunch, and a bird would like dive bomb my head, my crown chakra, dive bomb, like come within, and I'd just be like, yeah, that happens now. Like all the time, like, birds were just so on me. And I noticed it, and I had a bird follow me when I was driving back from Seattle, like the full length of the Oregon coast. Like, are you my mother? Like, are you lost? Do you need help? So, I mean, I just feel like those moments where we get a little tap, like you said, that like, this feels different. The birds fly by me all the time. For some reason, that one felt different. There's some sort of connection here. There's something, and I think the choice to lean into that is really a brave and courageous one too, because we do live in a culture here in the States, at least, that's like wants to know the facts and wants to have it all figured out. And, if we do have any of that beautiful type A accomplishment or whatever based energy, we want to know for sure. And I think leaning into the feeling and the connection in the moment is also really powerful.
Being okay with uncertainty, I think, has probably been my biggest spiritual path. Uncertainty about my own health, uncertainty about what's beyond this, and just being okay with that, and choosing to still anchor into love, self-compassion, and wherever this growth process is going to take me, even when it's hard. And so I think that's something that we can all benefit from, because the world is always changing. The ground underneath our feet is always changing. Is to be able to have that practice of saying, and that's okay, is
Yeah.
it just can keep you anchored through it all.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. You're writing about this now. You're translating this
Yeah.
experience and wisdom into a beautiful book. And I know, having written a few myself, that that is such a process, as my Canadian friends would say. It's a process. So I just send you all the love
Yeah,
throughout that
thank you.
process. And thank you for going through that process. Sometimes people are like, oh, I see this now. I was just in a training recently on Zoom where someone's like, oh, I have my book. I'm not trying to sell it to you. I was like, sell it to me. How many years did you spend writing that thing? Like, how much wisdom is in that? This was someone who teaches yoga for multiple sclerosis too. I'm like, you base that on your, like, come on, like,
Yeah.
it's worth $14.99. Come on. Anyway, that's a sidebar. But I want to talk about what's going into this book. How is it different? And what's that process been like for you so far?
Well, there are no recipes. So
Yes.
it's one of the ways it's different.
Yeah. No green juice?
There's no green juice. It's interesting because I think in some ways it's similar to some of the experience I've had writing it reminds me of my first book, which was Crazy Sexy Cancer Tips. Um, Although this is not a prescriptive book. This is really more so a teaching memoir. So
Yeah.
it's very story driven, and it's flexing new muscles for me, or expanding muscles for me, when it comes to memoir. And so for the last 15 years, have been writing more prescriptive work. Although
Right.
I use story throughout, always, because I think that people don't. There's a saying, and I don't know who said it, but like, folks don't necessarily remember. It could have been Maya Angelou, so I'm going to just completely butcher this. But it,
Please. Welcome.
unintentionally, people do not remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think that story is just such a great catalyst for that. And story brings us together. It creates common ground. Even if we come from different places, we can see ourselves in other people's experience, especially if they're willing to really share the stuff that most of us try to hide because we want to come off better than we are, or more together than we are, rather. And so my first book, when I had no idea what I was doing, was just like, she was a wild person. Like, it was just like, just roaring through the pages, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And thankfully I had editors back then who protected me from myself, but also who let me be myself fully. And
Yeah.
and I think I'm coming back to that place in some way, of just
Yeah.
having, even though I'm writing very difficult material, and
Yeah.
that material is working me. Um, I'm having a lot of fun in the process, and it reminds me just how, for me, that creativity is such medicine.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah. Creating things can be such a healing process,
yeah,
and things come up you didn't even know were there. And that,
100%. And flexing that creativity and growing your creativity and leaning on it and expanding it and challenging it,
mhm.
is very fun to me, and especially when I'm talking about difficult things. So I'm like, okay, this is tough. I'm even feeling this. I'm sobbing over the keyboard. How can I delight someone in this process? Where's the humor? Like, what are the other beats, and what kind of tone do I want to strike here in this scene versus where I'm going? Like, how can I make this a page turner? Right.
Yeah.
So, hard and fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It also makes me think about Suzanne O'Brien, who we both know, who is coming on the show, and she talks about just how we need to fold grief back into our awareness, right? And loss and end of life. We just have to fold it back in. It's like, and there is, I love how you talk about sort of pressing the right buttons around it, right? Like, what's the tone? What's the flavor? Because it doesn't just have to be this heavy thing we avoid. It can be sad and all the feelings and just normal and just something that is probably a part of all of our lives, unless you're someone who, everyone else is grieving and went before, you had that experience. Pretty much all of us are going to lose someone or something we love and have that deep experience of grief. So if we could befriend it, like you said, care for it and bring it in a little more, get in here. And I feel like with your book, you're doing that, right? You're bringing it into, okay, health and green juice and positivity and jokes and grief, right? It's all so important and part of life.
Well, it's your full personality, right? So that there's moments at funerals that are hilarious.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? There are moments where you're just you cannot believe what you're reading, or you start crying, or you want to start yelling for the person. Grief is a full body, full spectrum, complete emotional experience. It's not just sad.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I'm allowing for myself is to say okay, well, what is that spectrum? And how can I bring that to the actual work? Not necessarily through the prescription or saying, this is what you can expect and this is what you do when you hit that. But I'm going to show it to you through the work.
Yeah. I'm so excited to read this book when I think it's 2023 ish. We'll give it an ish date for now, but I'm really excited to read it. And again, I just think these conversations are so important to bring a little more mainstream. And I think with the impacts of the pandemic, we kind of have to. And so I hope for anyone listening that is going through grief that they at least know, I mean, we all know we're not alone, but then they're also that, we're not alone in losing someone, but also in the process after. I think that's the really important piece that, like you said, we kind of tuck away. I remember, crying in public places and being like, why isn't this normal? Why are people looking at me like this is weird? Other people feel this way today. I'm sure of it. Come on, can we just be honest? So in closing, I'm just wondering, on that note, a lot of people are facing grief maybe for the first time. What would you say to someone who's really in the thick of it right now?
I would say don't push the river. Be gentle with yourself. Be where you are. And I would just go back to the advice that I shared a little while ago, which was give yourself permission and know that it's going to take longer. There is no finish line. You're not going to get rid of it, cut it out, make it go away. It's a part of you. Yeah. But it can grow you. And that love didn't go anywhere. And you can still share it. And you can still experience it through the memories, through the legacy, through how you're going to live your life. My dad impacted my life in so many ways, and his impact is part of how I want to continue to live my life. The lessons that he taught me, And so you're not alone.
Yeah. And your dad continues to teach us, because now I know the golden years are for shit. Or I'll translate that to, I'm going to live my golden years now.
Yes.
I'm going to live them now. And so the golden years are great, and they're happening now.
Yeah.
What's next for you? You're working on your book, and that's coming out. Anything else you want to share with folks who are listening, ways they can connect with you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so much, but I tend to, when I'm working on something, I go deep. So that's really where my heart is right now. But people can find me at kriscarr.com. If you want to spend some time, I'm there. And I have lots of goodies for you there. So come on over. I'd love to get to know you.
Yes, get to know Kris. She is fabulous. I do have one more question. I've just started asking this.
Yeah.
And I just asked Guy who's coming on the podcast this, and he's like, oh, I feel cheesy answering it. And I was like, great. We need more of this. What is giving you hope right now?
Oh, that's such a great question. What's giving me hope? I don't know. People give me hope. I think that people are absolutely remarkable. And even when we're being assholes to each other, we've got incredible capacity. And so I try to stay focused on the positive of our capacity, because it's so easy to get sucked into the negative. But on a practical, just me level, what gives me hope is joy. And so I try to create as much of it as I can in my life. not through the big things, but through the little things.
Yeah.
The little moments of joy each day that just lift me up and keep a spring in my step, and keep me hopeful.
Yes. I was kind of looking over your shoulder, wondering if your dog was going to pop in, because that's like the perfect example of little moments of joy for me. I mean, I have 2 dogs, so I feel like they bring so much joy.
She just sighed and farted. So
she's with me.
She's here.
We were joking this morning that our dog Boomy, he'll like fart and scare himself and start barking. So there's the levity for you, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, people of the world listening.
That's what's going to happen when we're in we're much later in life. I'm gonna fart and scare myself and
scare yourself. Who was that?
And I will remember. I'll remember you in that moment, Lisa.
Oh my God, I'm so touched. Oh, I'm as a type A accomplishment person, I think done. Check. I just completed my mission in life. Thank you so much, Kris. Thanks for bringing everything that you are here and for sharing it with us. I'm so inspired by you. I have so much love for you. And I know everyone listening, I'm sure, feels lots of similar feels. So if you don't know Kris well enough already, go check her out at kriscarr.com. I highly recommend everything and all of the unicorn sparklingness that she is. Oh, I have something for that. There it is. And then we'll wrap with some applause. There we go. Kris Carr, everybody. Thank you very much, Kris Carr. Kris Carr.
Thank you. I love spending this time with you and all that goodness right back to you. And thank you for doing this podcast. It's already so important, and I can't wait to see how it grows and feel honored to be one of your early guests.
Yay! I love it. Thank you, Kris. Thanks so much for listening. My hope is that you walk away from these episodes feeling supported and like you have a place to come to find the hope and inspiration you need to take your next small step forward. I do want to make sure it's clear that this podcast isn't offering any prescriptions. It's not advice or any kind of diagnosis. Your decisions are in your hands, and we encourage you to consult with any relevant healthcare professionals you may need to support you through your unique path of healing. For more information and resources, please visit my website, howwecanheal.com. There, you'll find tons of helpful resources and the full transcript of each show. You can also click the podcast menu to submit requests for upcoming topics and guests. Before we wrap, I want to send thanks to our guests today, to Christine O'Donnell and Celine Baumgartner of Bright-Sided Podcasting, and to everyone who helped support this podcast, directly and indirectly. Alex, thanks for taking the dogs out while I record. I'd also like to give a shout out to my brother Matt. He passed away in 2002. He wrote this music and recorded it, and it makes my heart so happy to share it with you now.